Good evening, day walkers and night stalkers. It's me, your twisted southern horror queen, coming to you live from under a full moon, right here in southeastern Louisiana. I'm being brought to you live tonight by Armed Radio Digital and TuneIn Satellite. They're dedicated to corrupting the masses no matter what continent you live on. There is no exemption from anybody from the madness that seeps out of this mind. And my poor producer, Jimmy Bell, has had to sit through this insanity for over an entire year now. I'm not sure exactly how much more I could have screwed Jimmy up, but I'm sure there's been some kind of repercussions for that. I apologize. And speaking of my boy Jimmy, him and Paul Daniels have a show right here on Armed Radio every Thursday night called Pod Talk. I think you might understand how he's come to deal with me for so long if you listen in one Thursday evening. All right, so before we get the ball rolling, had a few little technical difficulties this evening, so I've cussed and thrown a few things, and now everything's working fine. Isn't it funny how that works out? Anyway, before we get started, I got to give a big shout out to some of my sponsors. That would be Surreal Studios, D&M Graphics, Renegade Racing Fuel, Amelie Oil, and of course, my friends over at Naked Wines. Of course, one of my most favorite sponsors in the entire world. Got to tell you guys, I've sampled just about everything they have. It's all excellent. And I have a very picky palate. I would tell you if something sucked. Trust me, I tell you. So, they've got some really cool promotion stuff coming our way. Haven't received it yet, but as soon as we do, you guys are going to reap the benefits too. And trust me, it's some good stuff, especially going to get you out of a jam at Christmas. So for those of you who have to wait to the last damn minute to do your Christmas shopping, Big John is one of those. It definitely gets you out of the doghouse. But for all those creepy kids on your list, you know you got them. You're tired of buying them hoodies. You're tired of buying them black T-shirts. Stop all that bullshit. I've got the perfect gift for you. Now, the Adrian Trilogy series is in the process of being rewritten. The third editions will be coming out next year. So what I'm selling right now, the second editions, will be collector's editions. There will never, ever be any more than what we have on hand right now. So if you want to grab a little piece of history, have it personally autographed for one of your friends or family, God help you if you got family that would enjoy that. That's awesome. Drop me a message on Facebook, inbox me real quick, and let me know, and I'll get that out to you as soon as humanly possible, and I'll throw you a couple little goodies in there. But if you're interested, I've got some different packages on what I'm doing. Just give me a shout, and I'll give you the rundown on them. I see my boy Clint Wallingford's in the house. Now, I'm not going to give you any grief tonight, Clint, because it's Monday, and I think I've given you enough. But I hope everything's going good. Tell the wife I said hello. You guys stay warm up there, and hopefully we'll be seeing you again real soon. All right, so now I've got a little bit of shameless self-promotion out of the way. And, you know, sometimes we just got to do it. Let's see. I think it's about time we do it. Now, are you guys going to say it along with me? Come on, say it along with me. You know where I'm fixing to go with this. It's time to dim the lights, lock the doors, kick out the kids, and grab that tasty adult beverage because we're fixing to get our scary on. All right. So as the promo stated, we're going to do a 2 or maybe 3-part kickoff on the Warrens and some of their most famous cases, because I guarantee you, even if you haven't heard of the Warrens, you've heard of their work, whether it's been in a fictional sense, through a book, films, whatever, you've heard of the Warrens. So I'm going to get you guys a little bit more acquainted with them for the next few shows. Kim Davidson's in the house. Hey, my girl, hope everything's going good for you. All right, so the Warrens were like the most renowned demonologists, authors, lecturers, and of course, paranormal investigators of their time. These guys were like the original Ghostbusters, that's for sure. They're very well respected in the paranormal community, even still to this day. But back in the day when nobody was talking about demons and possession and what ghosties can do to your house, um, there was them. And they were so well respected that the Catholic Church would actually call on them to go and investigate whenever they had word of something weird or terrifying that was going on in their parish. And not only did the Warrens prove that there really were beasts under the bed, they were some of the first people that actually documented with photographs and recordings. So they've got a massive library. Even though there were no digital cameras and things like that back in the day, they were successful in capturing a whole lot of spooky things on film. Good to see you guys tonight. Glad you joined me. And I also see Big Johnny Blender's in the house. He's going to be sitting there talking bad about me. So y'all don't ignore anything he types in. So Ed actually grew up in a haunted house in Connecticut. Not a whole lot of people know that. His dad was a policeman, and he was a skeptic, I guess, to say the least. And he would always tell Ed that there's always some kind of rational or logical explanation for all this crazy stuff you're seeing. But he never could come up with any logical reasons for the things that Ed saw. Now, in Ed's room, he had a monster in the closet. And he said that that closet door would open and there would be a dark, shadowy figure that would come out. And sometimes it would come out in this form of an orb, and it would grow lighter. And as it grew lighter, a face would materialize in that orb. He would hear the thing walking up behind him. He could see it, obviously. And he said the room would turn ice cold. Those are three very strong signs that something's going the hell on in your room, dude, right? Hey, Freddie. Hey, Ashley. Glad to see you guys here tonight. Sorry you're late. No, honey, you're right on time. I was having some technical issues tonight. We just got the ball rolling. All right. So when Ed was 16 years old, he takes a job as an usher at a local theater. And he starts noticing this chick that keeps coming in on Wednesday nights with her mom. Well, eventually one Wednesday night, he decides he's going to man up and walk her home. Well, he walked her home, and she asked him out on the next date, which that was kind of radical for back in the day. But that's how him and Lorraine actually became a thing. A little while later, he was 16 then. At 17, he enlisted in the Navy. Well, 4 months after that, his ship actually wound up being sunk in the Atlantic. So he got sent home in this 30-day survivor leave, and that's when he married Lorraine. So he goes back and he finishes his tour, and he decides he's going to study artistry, but he also decides to step in his dad's footsteps, and he becomes a police officer as well. So between the things that he saw in his young adult year or young childhood and his young adult years as far as war and being a police officer, he was pretty certain that there really were evil creatures lurking around in the shadows. And Lorraine, yeah, she actually saw a few of those evil critters that were lurking around. Now, she was born clairvoyant. So together, these two made one hell of a team. But Ed used a lot of science when he did his investigating. And the first thing he would do when he went in the house was to try to debunk the story. But when Lorraine walked in, if there was something truly there, she saw it and she heard it. And Ed figured out pretty quick that he needed to listen to her regardless to what he saw or felt. Now, I wanted to kind of go back on his time as being an artist. He actually did study art, and he was pretty artistic. He was very talented. Not quite as talented as Freddie, which let me cut in for a minute. Sometime around 11 or 12 on Saturdays, Freddie does some live drawings on Facebook. You guys have got to sit back and watch that. He's amazing. Very talented young man. Kudos, my boy. So Lorraine and Ed would hear about these haunted houses in their area. Well, they're still fairly young, and you don't go knocking on somebody's door and say, hey, I want to see your ghost, because you're not getting in, right? So Ed came up with this genius plan where they would go to these houses that they heard were having some spiritual issues, and he'd park across the street from them, stand out in the street, and he'd sketch the house. Well, as he's standing there drawing the house, you could see the curtains going back and forth, and people are looking out the windows and out the doors because they're trying to figure out what the hell this dude's doing across the street drawing. So after a while, he'd get back in the car, and he'd send Lorraine to the front door. Well, Lorraine would knock on the door and turn on that charm. And she said, "Yeah, my husband and I've always been interested in haunted houses." And she wouldn't elaborate on how she knew what was going on. But she said, "This is a gift for you that my husband drew. I'd like to have him come up and introduce himself to you, but he's kind of shy." Well, of course, at that point, the owner is kind of put on a spot. So they've been given a gift, a beautiful sketch of their property. Of course, they're going to invite Ed up on the porch to introduce himself. And, a few sentences later, they're inside the house and hearing the ghost story. So it was rather ingenious that he came up with this whole little plan. And it got his feet in quite a few of these haunted houses. But that's well before they actually started documenting and doing investigations on some of these places. But I just wanted you guys to have a little bit of the background so you can see how they became the folks that we actually know they are now. And I guess one of the main questions is what one case really got them organized and led them in the direction that they actually wound up going in. Well, Ed and Lorraine had been contacted to come and check out this old farmhouse because the owner said there was some really weird stuff going on there. Well, when they get there, the president's presence was immediately drawn to Lorraine when she walked into the door. Now, he's walking around trying to debunk all the things that they're saying is happening. But here's Lorraine standing in the corner having a conversation with a little girl ghost. So the little girl is, she's frantic and she's been searching for her mother. And at that point, they realize that she's been earthbound in that house for decades, desperate, heartbroken, looking for her mama. Well, she obviously didn't know she was dead. So then the question came to not finding and documenting and proving the fact that there were ghosts and things from other realms that lurked about. The question then came, how do we help them? So in 1952, the Warrens founded the New England Society for Psychic Research, and it wasn't long before they were fully staffed with doctors and clergy and scientists and photographers and police officers, and you name it, they were staffed up. And the cases just started piling in because now there was some place for these people to go and find help. Back in the day, and still really to this day, the first place you think to turn is either to a medium, which 9 chances out of 10 is not the right thing to do, or your church. Well, a lot of churches don't like to talk about things that, are happening in the spirit world or demons. For some reason, a lot of these churches will not acknowledge these things, even though they're in the Bible and have been so for thousands and thousands of years. Daniel Hall, nice to see you, my honey. I hope you're staying warm up there in them hills. And there's my girl, Susan Jones. And yes, he does love me. He's very confident. He's a good boy. Y'all don't get it. Freddie gets it, though. So anyway, they've got themselves organized. They've got this organization set up, and they've got a bunch of willing volunteers that are working with them to help them do their research and try to figure out exactly what it is that they can do to help these earthbound spirits and to help these families that are dealing with things that are bumping around in the night that are not necessarily wanted in their homes. So first up was the Perrin family haunting. Now, that may not sound familiar to you guys, but I bet you would recognize it if I said The Conjuring, that was released on film in 2013. Now, I usually have a whole lot of problems when people take stories and try to redo them and put them on film because they sensationalize. Of course, there's a whole lot of fluff and stuff that goes on there because it's Hollywood, right? Well, the one thing I will say for The Conjuring is that they did a really good job depicting the things that Ed described in his case files. However, they did not follow the storyline exactly as things went down. But let me give you guys a little rundown on what was going on there. This house was originally built in 1736, and it was once inhabited by Bathsheba Thayer, just like they said in the movie, and her 4 children. 3 of them died very young. Now, back in the day, a high infant mortality rate wasn't anything to raise an eyebrow over, but rumor had it that Bathsheba murdered 3 of the 4 children, the females, with a knitting needle before they all reached the age of 7. Now, she was suspected of practicing witchcraft, and there are other medical records that also state she was stricken with some kind of bizarre muscle malformation. And there are varying stories on how and when she died. Of course, we know the version that's in the movie is that she hanged herself there on the property in that big oak tree. But some people say she died of old age and then immediately turned to stone. Either way, neither were a conventional passing, I guess is what you could say. Susan went, wow. Bathsheba was said to be an introvert. She was a very nasty individual, and the entire community was absolutely terrified of her, and they considered her a Satanist. But she wasn't the only negative entity that was attached to this property. There had been 8 different generations of her family that lived and died there, and there were a whole lot of people that died there that either took their own lives or they died in tragic or traumatic incidents. Very few passed from natural causes. But even those disgruntled spirits weren't nearly as nasty and foul-tempered as Bathsheba was. So that's the basic backstory on this daunting Rhode Island property. Let's fast forward to 1970 when the house and the 200-acre property was purchased by the Perrons. When the Warrens first came on site and they interviewed the family, of course, they wanted to know what all kind of stuff was going on and how they were dealing with everything and how the family was dealing with everything. They admitted that the encounters with the spirits in the house had started from the first day that they lived there, but the ghosts that they were dealing with at that time were friendly. They even made comments that they kept the kids occupied by playing with them, and some of them actually were helping out with the chores, and they were just kind of cool to have the ghost around. But it didn't stay that way very long, and it typically doesn't. So if one of you guys moves into a house and there's a cool little ghost there that's helping you do the dishes, don't fall into that shit. It's not going to stay all sweet and homey for very long. Anyway, Carolyn was actually the first one to have a bad experience. She was laid out on the couch one afternoon taking a nap when all of a sudden she realized she was having this really severe cramp in her calf. And it got to be so bad that she sat up and she sees there's actually a puncture wound there and she's bleeding. So when Lorraine comes to the house and she does her walkthrough and Carolyn tells her about this thing, Lorraine immediately said that it was Bathsheba and that somehow she had found a way to take her murder weapon of choice into the afterlife with her and was still using it. But that was just the first of the evil madness that started kicking in. Now, Carolyn, which was the mother, seemed to catch the brawn of all of these evolving attacks because every time something happened, it was getting worse and worse. That she was not the only one that Bathsheba screwed around with. The entire family was hearing these disembodied voices and they were seeing furniture moving around. And they actually came face to face with several full-bodied entities that were known to bite, pinch, scratch, pull hair. And one of them even had a habit of grabbing Roger's crotch from time to time. I guess that one might have needed some personal attention. Hey, Brandy, good to see you. So Bathsheba was getting stronger because as these things do, they thrive off of fear and anger and hostility and all the bad emotions that us humans are so subjectable to. So she's growing in strength, and she actually showed up in full form one evening and told Carolyn to take her family and get out or she would drive them out with death and gloom. Well, when they didn't, things started getting really bad. Now, there was this one child ghost that used to play with the youngest Perrin girl. And this little ghost would actually warn the kid when Bathsheba was coming. Now, that's bad when you got one ghost telling you, hey, you need to go someplace and do something because this badass is coming around. So Bathsheba took to throwing furniture around and causing their beds to levitate and biting the kids and all kind of nasty shit. But the parents still didn't leave. So Bathsheba decided she was going to try a new approach. So she began attacking Carolyn internally, psychologically. And after a while, she was successful in possessing her. Now, as with any possessed individual does, their personality completely shifts. And Carolyn started acting real aggressive towards the kids, especially the youngest of their daughters. Well, Rogers dealt with all this paranormal madness for long enough, and now he's freaking the hell out because Carolyn has just lost her shit. And that's when the Warrens were brought in to help 4 years later in 1974. Well, when they showed up at the front door, Bathsheba just knew that her rampage was fixing to come to an end. So she starts raising all kinds of hell. But Lorraine was on to her, and she was reading Bathsheba like a book. And that crazy bitch did not like it. So if you've seen the movie, like I said, a lot of things they did a really good job with a lot of things, like the special effects and stuff like that. It exactly matched the notes that Ed has in his case files. But when Ed and Lorraine came in with their crew and they set up all their cameras and they got ready to start trying to communicate with Bathsheba, all kind of crazy shit starts happening. And then Carolyn starts screeching in this foreign language and her chair starts to levitate off the floor, just like the exorcism scene in the movie. Well, that was all that Roger could handle. So he comes unbolted and he kicks the Warrens and their crew out of the house. So that's where there's a whole big variance in the Conjuring movie as opposed to what really went down. Ronnie and Lori Owens is in the house. Good to see you guys this evening. So after all of that madness, things did calm down, but only a little bit. The parents were stuck in that house for another 6 years. So that's 10 years they lived in all this craziness. But it was a financial thing, and they weren't able to do anything. They weren't able to get the hell out of this house until 10 years had passed. So in 1980, this new family moved in, and guess what? Them and every other family that have lived in that house since then have reported that there's some wicked, crazy shit still going down in this house. But it never did reach the level that it did in the early 70s when Bathsheba was tormenting the hell out of the parents. I actually did try to do some research on reports and on these families that lived in that house afterwards, but all I could ever find was that there were mentions that there was activity still going on. You couldn't associate it with a name, and there were no specific cases or anything. Hey, my girl Rhonda's in the house. I'm glad to see you, sweetie. And Kenya's in the house too. Glad to see you guys. Y'all hang in there. We're still talking the Warrens. And I'm going to babble on these guys for a while because, like, a fangirl on them really hard. Actually, Ed, we lost Ed in 2006, but Lorraine is still out there. She has just recently stopped doing lectures in the last 3 years. I think she did one I know she did one interview in 2013, and we'll talk about it a little bit later on the show if I can make it that far. So the next case, or the next big case that they busted that I know all of you guys have heard about, and then, yes, I am going to ramble on and on and on about, is the Amityville Horror House. So, yeah, it's on. So first, I'm going to give you a little rundown of the history of this creep fest, and I'm warning you now, like I said, I'm going to ramble, and we probably won't get any further than Amityville, and I may not tell you everything I know about Amityville, because I'm sure we're probably going to run out of time before I can get to that point. But the house was built in 1924, but all that crazy shit started way before that. Before the area was officially settled, this particular spot where the house sits was territory to a tribe of Shinnecock Indians. Now, on that very spot, there was a shack where they used to keep their physically and mentally ill. Now, let me set this up for you. I'm not talking about a nice little building where they were brought meals and stuff. I'm talking about a mud and stick hut where they took all their sickos and defectives to die. And so it begins. The soul was, of course, tainted with suffering, and negative energies were just basically stamped into the area there. But after all of that, this dude named John Ketchum moved on to the same spot, and he builds this little bitty cottage where he decided he was going to practice black magic. Now, it's rumored that Ketchum actually showed up there because he hauled ass out of Salem during the witch trials. And it's also rumored that he hid in the basement right there where the Amityville house would be built in 1925. Now, the red room that they found in the basement was actually the basement for the cottage that Ketchum had built. It's the only still existing part of that cottage that the Amityville house was built on top of. So this dude Ketchum would go out and he'd round up these Indians and he'd lock them in the red room and he'd torture the hell out of them because it was Saturday night and he just really didn't have anything better to do, I guess. But the legend states that Ketchum actually was so insane that he slit his own throat because he thought it would give him the ability to live forever. Well, in 2005 film version, DeFeo kept hearing these voices that said, catch him and kill him. And if you were watching real close, you saw in the refrigerator where the little letter magnets arranged themselves to say the same thing. Well, the reason behind that, or the history behind that little catchphrase, is that's what Ketchum would say, and that's actually what he did. He would catch him and kill him, the Indians, that is. And as if that wasn't bad enough, this evil bastard requested that his remains be buried right there on the property. And as far as anybody knows, they are. And that would explain a whole lot of the shit stirring going on around there, wouldn't it? So, again, the blood and suffering of the tortured have seeped even further into the ground here. And it's compounded by Ketchum practicing his dark arts there. So, now we have the perfect cocktail for some wicked evil shit, right? So from what I found out, this family, the DeFeos I'm talking about now, granted, there's been several decades that have passed since Ketchum did his bullshit. The house was built in 1920 something, and the DeFeos move in. So a lot of time has passed. If you follow any kind of demonic activity or hauntings, you know that sometimes these places or these things will lie dormant until the perfect opportunity presents itself. So that's when enter the DeFeos, right? So from what I found, the family was actually in a whole lot of trouble to begin with. Now, Ronald Sr., which was the father, was both physically and verbally abusive to the wife and kids. Now, Butch and Dawn were in their teenage years, and there was even more turmoil there. And you guys know the demonic they're really attached to turmoil because of teenagers and adolescents, which there were other younger siblings. But at that point, Dawn was admitting to using LSD and a whole bunch of other goodies, and so was Butch. In fact, the DeFeo residence had been under surveillance for quite a while by the DEA. It was said that Butch was suspected of smuggling drugs in his speedboat right there across the bay. And he has actually admitted since that he was using heroin pretty heavy at the time. Now, am I hinting around that this was a drug-induced mass murder? No, I am not. What I'm saying is that his drug problem only caused the negativity to fester, and it gave them a pretty decent portal to work through, right? So, when you're already in a negative environment and you're adding to it by drinking and using drugs and fighting, you are feeding any evil entity that is attached to that area that you're in. And at this point, we already know there's a whole lot of evil attached to this little place right here. So, as we already know, Butch claimed that the voices had been telling him to kill his family. And of course, on the night of November 13th, 1974, DeFeo stated that he was handed a rifle by a dark entity in a black hooded robe, and he walked around and he killed all 6 members of his family execution style. So you bet your sweet ass there was a shit ton of investigations, but the detectives were baffled over the fact that DeFeo had shot all of his siblings and his parents while they slept on 3 different levels of the house. Each body was found face down in their bed. There were no signs of a struggle. How could the first gunshot have gone off without waking up every single person in the house? That's Still unanswered to this day. Furthermore, all the neighbors there are like right on top of each other. So how is it that none of the neighbors heard all of these gunshots going off as well? And I'll take it a step further too. In the autopsies, not any single one of the DeFeos, including Dawn, had any kind of drugs in their system. So you can't say they were drugged and slept through it. Didn't happen. Hey, Jose, good to see you, honey. So on December 18th, 1975, just 13 months after this DeFeo massacre, the Lutz family moves in. So George and Kathleen thought that this little Dutch colonial home was fantastic. And of course, the price was a steal. In that neighborhood, it was unheard of for anything to be being sold around 80 grand. And the Lutzes weren't stupid either. They knew something was going on. So they asked the real estate agent, okay, what gives? Why is this property 1/3 of the price of everything else in this neighborhood? Well, the realtor did tell them about the murders, and they chose to buy the house anyway. But they never, of course, expected to leave it 28 days later, along with everything they owned. So from the very first night that they moved into the Amityville house, every single member of the family claimed that they were feeling all kind of strange things going on around them. Everybody was on edge, and they weren't, of course, not comprehending the evil influences that they were under. Well, within days of them moving in, everybody's personality had drastically changed. Kathy and George were fighting, and so were the kids. Chaos was running rampant in the Lutz household, and all the while, these evil entities that were embedded there began to build their forces by feeding on this negative environment. Hey, Tony, what's up with my eyes? I don't know. They're mine. So anyway, just like in the movie, George was plagued with this constant chill, and he was, of course, obsessed with feeding the fireplace. And there was also a noticeable change in his grooming habits, and both his and Kathy's health was declining rapidly. Now, Kathy, not knowing where the hell else to turn to, of course, reaches out to the church. So this Catholic priest shows up to bless the house, and as he's making his way through the house and he's saying his blessings and stuff, he starts upstairs and he gets to the second floor. Well, when he gets into the room where Mark and John DeFeo were shot, he starts sprinkling holy water all over the place, and then this disembodied voice tells the priest to get out, which he did. Quick, fast, and in a hurry. For some reason, the priest never did tell the Lutzes about the voice, but he did warn them not to use the upstairs room as a bedroom, and he told them that nobody should ever sleep there. So not long after that, the Lutz's youngest daughter starts spending all of her time in her room playing with her new imaginary friend. She described her friend as a red-eyed pig named Jody, who couldn't be seen by anyone unless she wanted to be seen. And this entity actually had the ability to change in shape and size, and it could even transform itself into something that was larger than the house itself. So things started getting a lot worse after the priest came to visit. Now, besides the typical banging and disembodied voices that were going on, there were these foul odors that were popping up all over the place. George actually found hoof prints outside the house in the snow one evening. And then these black stains started appearing on all the toilets and the ceramic fixtures, and this funky shit starts oozing from out of the walls. Hundreds of flies start infesting Mark and John DeFeo's room, and Kathy winds up being shoved into a wall by some unseen force. Then George starts waking up from a dead sleep every single night at 3:15 a.m., which, of course, was the same time the DeFeo murders went down. Hey, Keith, good to see you, dear. So they start trying to contact this priest again. Of course, they're not having any luck with it. Well, this one night, George wakes up and he feels something there in the room with him just kind of looming around in the darkness. And he looks over at his wife, and all of a sudden she transforms into what appeared to be a 90-year-old hag. So the next night, she tops that by levitating off of the bed. So George is about to lose his damn mind right now. And they start trying to contact the priest again. But every single time that they would call the priest, if the priest would answer, the phone lines would go dead. It would fill with static and just go dead. So they decided they were going to give up and take matters into their own hands, which they did. So they arm themselves with a crucifix and a Bible, and they start walking through the house saying the Lord's Prayer. And yeah, that only pissed off these evil spirits that had infested the house. And they let the Lutzes know by verbally demanding that they stopped what they were doing at that moment. So the final night was the absolute worst. The banging and the knocking had become so violent that it sounded like a marching band was plowing its way through the house. Furniture's flying around, doors are opening and slamming, and the kids are being terrorized. They're being pushed around and slapped around. Well, after 28 days of this madness, the family finally couldn't take it anymore. And they grabbed a few little personal items and hauled ass out of there to go stay at Kathy's mama's house. 20 days later, Ed and Lorraine Warren were called by Marvin Scott, who was a reporter with Channel 5 New York. Now, Scott had worked with the Warrens before on a couple of other investigations. And when he caught wind of all this crazy shit that's going on over at the Lutz's house, he knew that that family needed the Warrens to help them. Hey, Greg, good to see you. Ashley says I need to start listening to me more often. Yes, you do. All right, so a few days later, the Warrens are rolling up in the driveway. They get a team of reporters and investigators and parapsychologists all showing up there with them at the Amityville house. And it was just them because at that point, the Lutzes absolutely refused to go back in this house because damn that, right? So, Firebug, you're never going to let me live that down, are you? As we already know, the madness didn't just stop because the Lutzes left. Now, during this investigation, Ed, who seldomly had fallen victim to anything paranormal other than witnessing, he had never physically been affected. This was the first time he was. Of course, Lorraine was physically and spiritually and emotionally affected every single time she walked into a haunted house. But this was a first for Ed. During this investigation, he was pushed to the floor while he was using some religious provocation in the basement. Lorraine was also overwhelmed by the sense of a demonic presence, and she was plagued with these psychic impressions of the DeFeo family bodies laying on the floor covered in white bloody sheets. She was also physically attacked. She was pushed out of a room by some unseen force, and it was her that discovered that in walking from room to room and sensing the things that were going on in there and touching the things that were in the rooms, she was the one that realized that two of these Lutz girls were sleeping on the same beds that the DeFeo girls were shot in, and Carolyn and Roger were also sleeping in the same bed that the parents were murdered in as well. The only thing that had happened was that the mattresses had been changed out. Now, that was just dumb as hell right there. But anyway, the whole research team is suffering physical attacks during this investigation. Two of them were affected with heart palpitations that were so severe that they passed out. And another investigator saw something that terrified him so bad that he fainted as well. So it's actually a wonder that they were able to gather any kind of evidence at all, but they did. And of course, that infamous image of the DeFeo boy on the second floor stairs was when this was taken during the Warren investigation. So I don't know if you've ever seen this picture. If you follow my blog, you have, because I've definitely put it out there a few times. But this is one of the most terrifying pictures I have ever seen in my life. It ranks right up there among the top 5 anyway. Check that out. Go to my blog and type in Amityville. If you haven't seen that picture, you'll see it along with quite a few other disturbing things. But we like disturbing on the Twisted Southern Horror Queen show, don't we? So, like I said, they did manage to catch a whole bunch of stuff there. But I wanted to go back and touch on the Indians again. With the Shinnecock Indians having caused the torments and the suffering and all their ill will there, and John Ketchum murdering the other Indians on the ground, coupled with his practicing the black arts here. Oh, and let's not forget the DeFeo murders. The Warrens believed that all of these horrific events had been left on the property along with a very negative energy and dark history. No better breeding ground for a demonic infestation and poltergeist activity could ever be designed, even intentionally. The Warrens believed that these entities were directly responsible for the evil that plagued the lives of both the DeFeos and the Lutzes. Now, the Warrens did a good, and they gathered up a few of the Lutz's possessions along with the deed for the property. Now, the Lutzes decided they were going to sell everything else, and of course, they relocated to California. So, just about everything that I've already told you, a lot of us horror enthusiasts already knew, but I'm going to throw in even more madness. 30 something years later, Daniel Lutz has stepped from out of the shadows. Now, this story was published in 2013 in the UK Daily News, and I'm going to read some of the high points to you. Now, Daniel was 10 years old at this time, and now he's a really creepy looking middle-aged dude with some piercing blue eyes and a kind of creepy smile. Reminds you of anybody. But he says that because he lived in this house and because he was menaced by all these spirits, it ruined his life. It ruined him. He blames the evil presence on his stepfather, George, who dabbled in the occult. Daniel believes that George opened up some kind of gateway there and he lost control over. And as a kid, he was having problems coping with all the crazy shit that he'd seen and experienced in the house. So he left home at 15. He stayed homeless for a while he sorted through his things. And today he's actually estranged from his wife and 2 adult children. He lives in Queens now, and he's a stonemason. Now, Daniel was reluctant to tell his side of the story, but a friend of his had contacted this filmmaker who managed to persuade him to speak in a new documentary that's titled My Amityville Horror. So you may want to look that up. In the interview, he insists that the story is substantially true, even down to being levitated in his bed and seeing a demonic figure in his little sister's bedroom. He remembered seeing George's bookshelves lined with books on Satanism and black magic, and he even claimed that he saw George Lutz move a spanner telekinetically in his garage before they even moved into the Amityville house. Now, Daniel said that he started feeling weird about this place within just a couple of hours after moving in. His first experience was when he took a box upstairs to what was going to be their playroom, and he found it swarming with flies in the middle of December. So he starts swatting all these flies, and he realizes it's a losing battle. So he goes to get his mom, and by the time his mom gets back up there with him, all of the flies are gone, including the ones that he killed. So Daniel said that was the first thing for him, but there was this one night in particular that he remembered the entire family standing outside the house, and they're watching the garage door slam up and down, and there were no electric garages back in the day, so it wasn't a power thing. It was a ghost thing or a demon thing at this point. And on another night, he said he remembered walking back up to the house with George, and he looks upstairs at his 5-year-old sister's bedroom window, and he sees what he described as a cartoon character of an angry-looking pig with wolf-like teeth and laser beam red eyes. He said immediately he ran up to the room to go check on his little sister, and all he found there was an empty rocking chair rocking back and forth on its own. Now, shortly after that incident, Daniel said that a window slammed down on his hand. So he's sitting down at the kitchen table while his mom's tending to the wound, and he looks up and he sees this thing walk into the kitchen, knocked a knife off of the cutting board, and then came and sat down at the table with him, that he actually saw the pad in the chair dent in from the weight of something sitting down there. He said that he did share a room with his brother Christopher, and on their last night there, it was the absolute worst. Not just for them, there was all kind of crazy shit going on in that house right then, but his recollection, being a 10-year-old child, was that they woke up to their beds colliding in midair and the footboards banging against the ceiling. So at that point in time, that's when they all hauled ass out of the house. And now, ever since then, Daniel has declined to do any other interviews, and I think he's probably pretty much through. I think he just wanted to step up and say, look, yes, all this stuff did happen. Now y'all leave me the hell alone. But I did want to say this too. Around the same time, this is when Lorraine did an interview with Yahoo, and she said that the Amityville house was one case that haunted her the most, and that it was horrible, and that the evil followed her and Ed across the country. And she said that she would never, ever go back inside that house. Now, it is pretty well-known fact that Lorraine did have some kind of psychic episode after being exposed to whatever evil had taken root in that house. Now, she never has publicly admitted exactly what it was that she experienced, but they do hint around at it in another movie that we'll be talking about in one of the other upcoming shows. A little bit more lagniappe on Amityville. Remember the Indians that we were talking about? There's actually a little bit more to that story as well. And I'm going to give you the Reader's Digest version. There was a massive Indian massacre that took place just 1.5 miles from where the Amityville house sits now. Now, when the Dutch moved in, they didn't have the troops, and apparently they didn't have the balls either to take the local tribe on. So they hired this Englishman named Captain John Underhill to do their dirty work. So Underhill takes his men out, and at the end of the day, 120 plus of the local tribe were slaughtered. So Underhill and his men collect all the corpses, and they threw them in a heap at the peak of a hill, and then they sat down at the foot of the hill and ate dinner. Well, when this part of the country actually came to be settled, they built highways across the neck that passed directly over the spot where all these bodies were buried. The ground in that spot is now very different from the ground around it. It's tinged with a reddish cast, which the old people there say is caused by the blood of the Indians. And to take it a step further, remaining heirs of that tribe saw that the body of their chief was buried standing up. And in the local Shinnecock Indian legends state that when that happens, that means that the chief is ready and willing and able to seek out revenge and possess people and kill them for the things, the atrocities that happened to their people. And on top of that, Amityville also has a very long history of witches and, of course, witch trials. Now, some people were burned at the stake, and then after the fact, the accusers admitted that they'd lied. Gotta love that. All right, so I've rambled on about Amityville, and we did talk about the Conjuring, or actually the Perron family experience as well. But there's a whole lot more to Ed and Lorraine Warren, and we're going to go through all that in the next few shows. So you guys just bear with me. I'm sure you'll not have any problems because these are some crazy cool cases with a whole lot of documentation. So until next week, I want all you guys out there to keep it creepy because you know that I will.